The grand halls of Aldoria Palace echoed with whispers that morning. Queen Elizabeth stood at the window of her private chamber, watching the sunrise paint the kingdom's capital in shades of gold. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the letter that would change everything. For 40 years, she had kept this secret buried deep within her heart, but now circumstances had forced her hand. Princess Margaret hurried through the marble corridors, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The urgent summons from her sister-in-law had arrived just after dawn. As the king's younger sister, Margaret had seen many palace dramas unfold over the decades, but something about Elizabeth's tone in the message made her pulse quicken. She found the queen standing alone in the blue drawing room, her usually perfect posture slightly bent with the weight of what she was about to reveal. "Margaret, please sit," Elizabeth said, her voice steady but her eyes betraying deep emotion. "What I'm about to tell you concerns not just our family, but the very foundation of the throne." Margaret settled into the velvet chair, studying Elizabeth's face. The queen had aged gracefully, but today new lines of worry creased her forehead. "Whatever it is, Elizabeth, we'll face it together as we always have." Elizabeth turned from the window, clutching a faded envelope. "Before I married your brother, before I became queen, I had another life. A life I was forced to leave behind." She paused, gathering courage. "I had a child." The words hung in the air like suspended crystals. Margaret's hand flew to her chest, her emerald ring catching the morning light. "A child? But how? When?" "I was 19, Elizabeth continued, her voice growing stronger. "My family sent me abroad for a year, supposedly to study art in Switzerland. But I was there to have a baby, a daughter. They told me she died at birth. But last week I received this letter. She's alive, Margaret. My firstborn daughter is alive, and she's been living just outside our borders all these years." Margaret rose from her chair, crossing to embrace her sister-in-law. "Oh, Elizabeth, the burden you've carried alone all these years." She pulled back, looking into the queen's eyes. "Does William know?" Elizabeth shook her head. "How could I tell him? Our entire marriage, our children's legitimacy, the succession, everything would be questioned. But the woman who raised my daughter is dying. She wrote to me, wanting to clear her conscience. My daughter doesn't know who her real mother is, but the woman thought I had the right to know the truth before it was too late." "We must think carefully," Margaret said, pacing now. "The implications are staggering. If this becomes public knowledge—" "I know," Elizabeth interrupted. "That's why I called you first. You've always been the strongest of us, Margaret. Your discretion and wisdom are what I need now." Margaret stopped pacing and fixed Elizabeth with a determined gaze. "First, we need to verify this claim. There are those who would fabricate such stories for money or fame. Second, if it proves true, we need to consider what's best for everyone involved, including this young woman who has lived her whole life not knowing her true identity." Elizabeth nodded, grateful for Margaret's practical approach. "Her name is Alexandra. The letter included a photograph." She handed Margaret a small black and white picture. A young woman smiled back at them, and Margaret gasped. The resemblance to Elizabeth at that age was unmistakable. The same high cheekbones, the same gentle curve of the lips, the same intelligent eyes. "Dear God," Margaret whispered, "she's the image of you." "What am I to do?" Elizabeth asked, and for the first time in their long acquaintance, Margaret heard real fear in the queen's voice. "If I reach out to her, I risk everything. If I don't, I may regret it for the rest of my life." Margaret set the photograph down carefully. "We need more information." "Let me make some discreet inquiries. I still have contacts in Switzerland from my own time there. But Elizabeth, you must prepare yourself for the possibility that William will need to know. Secrets this large have a way of revealing themselves, and it's better he hears it from you than discovers it another way. Elizabeth sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of her 60 years. How do I tell my husband that I've lied to him for our entire marriage? How do I tell my children they have a sister they've never known? With courage, Margaret said firmly, the same courage that has made you a beloved queen. But first, let us be certain of the facts. I'll leave for Switzerland tomorrow under the pretense of visiting the spa. No one will question it. Thank you, Margaret. I knew I could count on you. Always, Margaret assured her. We're family, and family protects one another. But Elizabeth, you must prepare yourself. Once this door is opened, it cannot be closed again. 3 weeks passed before Margaret returned from Switzerland, and they were the longest weeks of Elizabeth's life. She went through the motions of her royal duties, attending state dinners and charity events, but her mind was constantly on Alexandra. She found herself studying her other children's faces, wondering if they shared features with their unknown sister. King William noticed his wife's distraction, but attributed it to the upcoming state visit from neighboring kingdoms. He had no idea that his sister was conducting a secret investigation that would shake the very foundations of their life together. Margaret's return was quiet, without fanfare. She appeared in Elizabeth's private study as the sun set, travel-weary but purposeful. Her expression told Elizabeth everything before she even spoke. "It's true," Margaret said simply. "I've seen the records, spoken to the nurses who were there. Alexandra is your daughter." Elizabeth's legs gave way and she sank onto the sofa. "Tell me everything." Margaret poured them both tea from the service that had been waiting, her hand steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. The woman who raised her, Marie Delacroix, was a nurse at the clinic. She was told to tell you the baby had died, but she couldn't bring herself to let the child be sent to an orphanage. She had recently lost her own infant and her husband in an accident. She took Alexandra and raised her as her own. "All these years," Elizabeth whispered. "All these years she's been alive." "There's more," Margaret continued. "Alexandra is a doctor. She followed in her adoptive mother's footsteps and works at a children's hospital. She's unmarried, dedicated to her work. By all accounts, she's had a good life, Elizabeth. Marie loved her as her own. But she never knew the truth?" Margaret shook her head. Marie told her that her biological parents were young students who couldn't care for her. She has no idea of her royal connection. Elizabeth stood and walked to the window, looking out at the kingdom she had served for so long. "What kind of mother am I? I believed them when they said she died. I didn't fight, didn't question. I just accepted it and moved on with my life." "You were 19, Margaret reminded her gently. "Your family, the pressures of the time, you had no choice." "There's always a choice," Elizabeth said bitterly. "And now I must make another one. Do I disrupt this woman's entire life with the truth? Do I risk my marriage, my other children's inheritance, the stability of the crown?" Margaret joined her at the window. "I've been thinking about this during my entire journey home. There might be a way to meet her without revealing everything immediately. The children's hospital where she works is always in need of royal patronage. A visit from the Queen would not be unusual." Elizabeth turned to her sister-in-law, hope flickering in her eyes. "I could see her? Speak with her?" "Carefully," Margaret cautioned. "We would need to plan every detail. And Elizabeth, you must consider that she might not want this truth. Her life is established. Finding out she's royalty, that her entire identity has been a lie, it could destroy her." "Or complete her," Elizabeth said softly. "Don't we all deserve to know where we come from?" Margaret sighed. "That's a decision only you can make. But there's one more pressing matter. William. My brother is many things, but stupid isn't one of them. If you pursue this, he will notice. He will ask questions." Elizabeth's shoulders straightened with sudden resolve. Then I'll tell him. Tonight. I've carried this secret for 40 years, Margaret. I won't carry it for 40 more. Are you certain? No, Elizabeth admitted. But I'm tired of being afraid. Whatever happens, at least it will be the truth. That evening, Elizabeth dismissed the servants early and asked William to join her in their private sitting room. It was the room where they had shared their most intimate moments over the years, where they had celebrated the births of their children and mourned the loss of parents. Now it would witness perhaps their greatest test. William entered with his usual energy, despite his 70 years. Darling, you've been distant lately. Is it the state visit? I can have Charles handle more of the arrangements if you're feeling overwhelmed. It's not the state visit, Elizabeth said, gesturing for him to sit beside her. William, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you before we married, but I was young and frightened, and I thought it was buried forever. The king's expression grew serious. He took his wife's hands in his. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. Elizabeth looked into the eyes of the man she had loved for 4 decades and began to speak. She told him about the young man she had loved before they met, about the pregnancy that had scandalized her family, about the daughter she had been told was dead. She watched as confusion, hurt, and anger passed across his face in waves. When she finished, the silence in the room was deafening. William released her hands and stood, walking to the fireplace. 40 years, he said quietly. 40 years of marriage, and you never thought to tell me? I thought she was dead, Elizabeth said, tears now flowing freely. What purpose would it have served to tell you about a dead child from before we met? And now? William's voice was controlled, but Elizabeth could hear the emotion beneath. Now she's alive, and you want to, what? Bring her here? Announce to the world that the Queen had an illegitimate child? I don't know what I want, Elizabeth admitted. I only know that she exists, and I can't unknow that. I can't pretend I don't have a daughter out there who has never known her real mother. William turned to face her, and Elizabeth was surprised to see tears in his eyes, too. Do you know what hurts the most? It's not that you had a child before we met. It's that you didn't trust me enough to tell me. All these years, Elizabeth, all the times I've asked if something was troubling you, and you said no. You were thinking of her, weren't you? Sometimes, Elizabeth whispered. On her birthday, when our children reached milestones, I wondered what she would have looked like, what kind of person she would have become. William returned to the sofa, suddenly looking older than his years. Margaret knows? I told her first. I needed her help to verify if it was true. I'm sorry, William. I should have come to you immediately, but I was terrified. Terrified of me? The hurt in his voice was clear. Terrified of losing you, of disappointing you, of shattering the life we've built together. They sat in silence for long minutes, the weight of 4 decades of marriage and this new revelation pressing down on them. Finally, William spoke. I need time to process this, but, Elizabeth, I want you to know that I love you. That hasn't changed. I'm hurt, I'm angry, but I love you. Can you forgive me? William took a deep breath. I don't know yet, but I'm willing to try to understand. Tell me about her. Tell me about Alexandra. The royal visit to St. Catherine's Children's Hospital was scheduled for a crisp autumn morning. Elizabeth had barely slept the night before, and Margaret had stayed with her, offering silent support. William had been distant, but not unkind in the days following her revelation. He had asked questions, processed the information in his methodical way, and finally agreed that Elizabeth should meet Alexandra, though he wasn't ready to accompany her. If you're going to do this, he had said the night before, then do it properly. But Elizabeth, be prepared for any outcome. She may not be what you're hoping for. Now, as the royal car pulled up to the hospital, Elizabeth felt her heart racing. Somewhere inside this building was her daughter, unknowing and unprepared for the earthquake about to shake her world. Dr. Alexandra Delacroix was briefing her team when the hospital director hurried in. The Queen's visit has been moved up. She specifically requested to tour the pediatric ward and meet our senior staff. Alexandra, I'd like you to lead the tour of your department. Alexandra nodded, smoothing her white coat. She had met dignitaries before, but royalty was different. There were protocols to remember, specific ways to address the Queen. She quickly gathered her composure and headed to the main entrance. Elizabeth saw her before Alexandra noticed the royal party. Her daughter moved with confidence through the hospital corridors, stopping to check on a young patient, laughing with a nurse. She was beautiful, accomplished, and clearly beloved by her colleagues. Pride swelled in Elizabeth's chest, followed quickly by grief for all the years lost. "Your Majesty," the hospital director was saying, "may I present Dr. Alexandra Delacroix, our head of pediatric surgery?" Alexandra dropped into a perfect curtsy, and when she rose, her eyes met Elizabeth's. For a moment, the Queen forgot to breathe. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. Did no one else see it? How could the world not know this was her daughter? "Dr. Delacroix," Elizabeth managed, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I understand you've done remarkable work here." "You're very kind, Your Majesty," Alexandra replied. "Would you like to meet some of our young patients? They're very excited about your visit." As they toured the ward, Elizabeth found herself studying every gesture, every expression. Alexandra was professional but warm, clearly passionate about her work. She introduced each child by name, knew their stories, their families. When a little boy grabbed her hand and refused to let go, she knelt beside his bed without hesitation, royal visitor or not. "He's scheduled for surgery tomorrow," Alexandra explained to Elizabeth. "He's a bit nervous." "Are you scared?" Elizabeth asked the boy gently. He nodded solemnly. "But Dr. Lexi says I'm brave. She's going to fix my heart." "I'm sure she will," Elizabeth said, her own heart breaking and mending all at once. As the tour continued, Margaret stayed close, watching for any sign that Elizabeth might reveal too much. But the Queen maintained her composure, asking appropriate questions, showing genuine interest in the hospital's work. Only Margaret noticed how her hands trembled slightly when Alexandra demonstrated a new piece of equipment, standing close enough that Elizabeth could have reached out and touched her. The visit was drawing to a close when Alexandra led them back to the main entrance. "Your Majesty, before you go, I wanted to thank you personally. Royal patronage means so much to institutions like ours. The children you met today, the lives we save, it's possible because of support from people like you." Elizabeth felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "Dr. Delacroix, might I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Your Majesty." "Your accent, it's not quite French, despite your name." Alexandra smiled. "You have a good ear, ma'am. I was raised in Switzerland, though my adoptive mother was French. I'm afraid my accent is a bit of a mixture." "Adoptive mother?" Elizabeth kept her tone carefully neutral. "Yes, though she was the only mother I ever knew. She passed away recently." A shadow crossed Alexandra's face. "She was a remarkable woman, a nurse who dedicated her life to helping others. I became a doctor because of her." "I'm sorry for your loss," Elizabeth said softly. "She must have been very proud of you." "Thank you, Your Majesty. She always said I was her miracle, her gift from God when she thought she had lost everything." Margaret gently touched Elizabeth's elbow, a subtle signal that it was time to leave. Elizabeth nodded, taking one last look at her daughter. "Thank you for the tour, Dr. Delacroix. Your work here is truly inspiring." As the royal party departed, Alexandra watched the cars disappear, a strange feeling settling in her chest. There had been something in the Queen's eyes, an intensity she couldn't quite place. She shook her head and returned to her patience, unaware that her life was about to change forever. In the car, Elizabeth finally allowed the tears to fall. Margaret held her hand tightly, offering silent comfort. "She's wonderful," Elizabeth whispered. "She's everything I could have hoped for." "She is," Margaret agreed. "The question now is what comes next." Elizabeth wiped her eyes, her resolve strengthening. "I want to tell her. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. She deserves to know who she is. And if she doesn't want to know, if she's happy with the life she has, then I'll respect that," Elizabeth said. "But at least I'll have tried. At least she'll have the choice I never had." Back at the palace, William waited in his study. He looked up as Elizabeth entered, taking in her tear-stained face and the new lightness in her bearing. "You met her," he said. It wasn't a question. "I did." Elizabeth sat across from him, feeling suddenly exhausted. "She's a pediatric surgeon, William. She saves children's lives. She's brilliant and kind and everything good in this world." William was quiet for a moment. "And she has no idea who you are?" "None. She thinks her biological parents were young students. She was happy, William. Her adoptive mother loved her. She had a good life." "Without you," William said gently. "Without me," Elizabeth agreed. "But perhaps that was for the best. What could I have offered her then? A life of scandal." "A mother who was forced to give her up anyway?" William stood and moved to sit beside his wife, taking her hand. "You would have loved her. That's what you would have offered. And that's what you can offer now if you choose to." Elizabeth looked at him in surprise. "You think I should tell her?" "I think," William said slowly, "that secrets have a way of poisoning everything they touch. We've seen that these past weeks. I also think that Alexandra is an adult who can make her own choices about whether she wants a relationship with her biological mother. But mostly, I think you'll never have peace until you try." "And us?" Elizabeth asked. "Can we survive this?" William sighed deeply. "I won't lie, Elizabeth. I'm still hurt. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But I've been thinking these past days about our life together. About the woman you are, the mother you've been to our children, the queen you've become. One secret, however large, doesn't erase 40 years of love." "I don't deserve you," Elizabeth said, fresh tears falling. "Perhaps not," William said with a small smile. "But you have me anyway. We'll face this together, as we've faced everything else. But Elizabeth, if we're going to tell Alexandra, we need to control how and when. The press, the public, the constitutional implications. It's going to be a storm." "I know," Elizabeth said. "Margaret's already thinking about how to manage it. But William, what about our children? How do we tell them they have a sister?" "One step at a time," William counseled. "First, we approach Alexandra privately. If she wants nothing to do with us, then at least our children are spared the upheaval. If she's open to knowing the truth, then we tell them before it becomes public." That night, Elizabeth found herself in the palace chapel, a place she rarely visited, despite her official role as defender of the faith. She knelt in the quiet space, not praying exactly, but thinking about the strange paths life takes. 40 years ago, she had knelt in a similar chapel in Switzerland, praying for her baby's soul, believing her dead. Now she knew the truth. Her daughter had lived, had thrived, had become someone extraordinary without her. Margaret found her there an hour later. "The household is wondering where you are," she said gently. "Let them wonder," Elizabeth replied. Margaret, how do I approach her? How do I tell someone that their entire life has been built on a foundation of lies? However well-intentioned? Margaret sat beside her on the pew. With honesty, with humility, with no expectations except the hope that truth is better than deception. She could reject me entirely. She could go to the press herself. She could hate me for disrupting her life. She could, Margaret agreed. Or she could be grateful to finally know where she comes from. You won't know until you try. Elizabeth nodded slowly. Will you help me write the letter? Of course. But Elizabeth, a letter might not be the best approach. This kind of news, it should come in person, don't you think? How? I can't just show up at her door. Hello, I'm the Queen and also your mother. She'd think I'd lost my mind. Margaret smiled slightly. Leave that to me. I have an idea. 2 weeks later, Dr. Alexandra Delacroix received an unexpected invitation. The Princess Margaret Foundation for Medical Research was hosting an exclusive dinner for leading doctors in their fields. Her presence was specifically requested by Princess Margaret herself. Alexandra was puzzled, but flattered. The royal visit to the hospital must have made an impression. She accepted immediately, not knowing that her life was about to change irrevocably. The dinner was held at Clarence House, Princess Margaret's London residence. Only a dozen doctors had been invited, making it an intimate affair. Alexandra wore her best evening dress, feeling slightly out of place among the portraits and priceless antiques. Princess Margaret greeted each guest personally, but when she reached Alexandra, her handshake lingered a moment longer. Dr. Delacroix, I'm so pleased you could come. I've heard wonderful things about your work. Throughout dinner, Alexandra found herself seated near the princess, engaged in conversation about medical advances and the challenges of pediatric surgery. She was surprised by how knowledgeable the princess was, how genuinely interested in the work. As the evening drew to a close and other guests began to leave, Princess Margaret approached Alexandra again. Doctor, I wonder if you might stay a moment longer. There's something particular I'd like to discuss with you. Alexandra agreed, curious. Margaret led her to a private sitting room where, to Alexandra's surprise, Queen Elizabeth waited. Your Majesty, Alexandra said, dropping into a curtsy, her mind racing. Why was the Queen here? What could they possibly want with her? Please, sit, Elizabeth said, her voice gentle but tinged with nervousness. Dr. Delacroix, what we're about to discuss is of the most personal nature. I must ask for your discretion regardless of how you choose to respond. Alexandra sat, her medical training kicking in. She had delivered difficult news to families many times. She recognized the signs of someone preparing to share something momentous. Of course, Your Majesty. Elizabeth looked at Margaret, who nodded encouragingly. Dr. Delacroix, Alexandra, I need to tell you something about your biological parents, about your birth. My birth? Alexandra felt the room spin slightly. I don't understand. My adoptive mother told me my parents were students. That wasn't true, Elizabeth said softly. Though Marie Delacroix told you that story out of love and a desire to protect you. The truth is, I am your biological mother. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Alexandra stared at the Queen, waiting for the punchline to what must surely be an elaborate joke. But Elizabeth's eyes were filled with tears, and Princess Margaret's expression was deadly serious. That's impossible, Alexandra said finally. You're the Queen. You can't be... Elizabeth reached into her handbag and withdrew a folder. When I was 19, before I married the king, I fell in love with someone deemed unsuitable. When I became pregnant, my family sent me to Switzerland. I gave birth to a daughter on March 15th. They told me she died. It wasn't until recently that I learned the truth, that Marie Delacroix, the nurse attending me, took pity on a baby destined for an orphanage and raised you as her own." Alexandra's hands shook as she opened the folder. Inside were documents, birth records, adoption papers that were never filed, photographs of a young woman who looked remarkably like the face she saw in the mirror each morning. "No," she said, standing abruptly. "This is a mistake. A cruel joke. I can't be—" "I know this is a shock," Margaret said gently. "We debated how to tell you, whether to tell you at all. But you deserve the truth." "The truth?" Alexandra's voice rose. "The truth is that I had a mother. A wonderful, loving mother who raised me and sacrificed for me, and never once made me feel like I wasn't wanted. She's barely cold in her grave, and you're telling me she was a liar?" "She loved you," Elizabeth said urgently. "Everything I've learned about Marie Delacroix tells me she loved you desperately. She didn't lie to hurt you. She lied to protect you, to give you a normal life." "Normal?" Alexandra laughed bitterly. "Nothing about this is normal. You're telling me I'm— what? A princess? That my entire life has been a fabrication?" "You're still who you've always been," Elizabeth said, standing too. "A brilliant doctor, a compassionate woman. That doesn't change. But yes, by birth you're my daughter. You have a claim to titles, to a place in the succession." "I don't want titles," Alexandra shouted, then caught herself, appalled at raising her voice to the Queen. "I'm sorry, I need air. I need to think." "Of course," Elizabeth said. "Take all the time you need. We're not going anywhere. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, we can talk more. And if you decide you want nothing to do with us, we'll respect that too. But I couldn't let another day pass without you knowing the truth." Alexandra looked between the two women, seeing for the first time the resemblance others had missed. The shape of her eyes from Elizabeth, the determined set of her jaw that she saw in Margaret. Her world tilted on its axis. "I need to go," she said quietly. I don't know what I need." "Margaret will arrange for a car," Elizabeth said. "And Alexandra, I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry. For the lost years, for the shock of this, for everything. But please know that not a day passed that I didn't think of you, didn't wonder who you had become. Meeting you at the hospital, seeing the wonderful woman you are. It was the proudest moment of my life." Alexandra fled then, unable to process more. In the car, she stared unseeing at London passing by, her mind reeling. She was the Queen's daughter. She had siblings she'd never met, the Prince of Wales, Princess Catherine. She had a claim to the throne of Aldoria. Her mother, Marie, the only mother she'd known, had lied to her for her entire life. At her flat, she pulled out photo albums, staring at pictures of Marie Delacroix. Looking now with new eyes, she could see the sadness her mother had carried, the weight of the secret. There were no pictures of Alexandra as a newborn, she realized suddenly. The earliest photos were from when she was perhaps 6 months old. Because Marie hadn't been there for her birth, because she had been born in a Swiss clinic to a terrified 19-year-old princess. She didn't sleep that night or the next. On the third day, she called in sick to work for the first time in years. Her colleagues were concerned, but she couldn't face them. How could she perform surgery when her hands wouldn't stop shaking? How could she save lives when her own life felt like it was ending? A week passed before she made a decision. She couldn't go forward without understanding the past. She penned a careful letter to Princess Margaret, asking if they could meet again. Within hours, a response came. The princess would be delighted to see her at her earliest convenience. This time, they met at Margaret's private apartment, away from the formality of palace protocol. Margaret had tea waiting, and they sat like two ordinary women, though nothing about the situation was ordinary. "I need to understand," Alexandra said without preamble. "I need to know everything. Not the sanitized version you told me last week. The truth. All of it." Margaret studied her carefully. Are you sure? Some truths are harder to hear than others. I've spent my career telling families their children might die, Alexandra said firmly. I can handle hard truths. So Margaret told her everything. About young Princess Elizabeth's romance with a dashing but unsuitable young man. About the scandal when her pregnancy was discovered. About the family's decision to hide her away, to force her to give up the baby. About the lie that the child had died, meant to allow Elizabeth to return to her duties without the burden of knowing her child was out there somewhere. She was destroyed, Margaret said quietly. When she came back from Switzerland, she was a shadow of herself. It took years for her to recover, and even then, there was always a sadness. She married my brother partly because he was kind and steady and would never hurt her the way she'd been hurt. But she grew to love him deeply. They've had a good marriage despite this secret between them. Does he know? Alexandra asked. She told him after she learned you were alive. It's been difficult, but William is a good man. He wants to meet you when you're ready. And their children? My siblings? The word felt foreign on her tongue. They don't know yet. Elizabeth wanted to speak with you first. If you wanted nothing to do with the family, there seemed no point in disrupting their lives, too. Alexandra set down her teacup carefully. What am I supposed to do with this information? I have a life, a career. I can't suddenly become a princess. No one's asking you to, Margaret said gently. You can continue exactly as you are. The public need never know if that's what you choose. Or you can acknowledge the connection privately, get to know the family without any official announcement. Or, if you decide you want it, you can take your place publicly as Elizabeth's daughter. The choice is entirely yours. Choice, Alexandra said bitterly. Funny how everyone talks about choice when all the choices were taken from me before I was even born. Margaret leaned forward. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But don't let that anger rob you of the chance to know your biological family. Elizabeth is a remarkable woman. Your siblings are good people. You have 3 half-brothers and a half-sister who would welcome you if given the chance. Why should I care about them when they never cared about me? Because they didn't know you existed, Margaret said simply. You can't blame them for not loving someone they didn't know about, but now there's an opportunity. The question is whether you're brave enough to take it. Alexandra bristled. I perform pediatric heart surgery. I don't lack bravery. Medical bravery and emotional bravery are different things, Margaret observed. I've seen the bravest soldiers cower at the thought of vulnerability. It's your choice, Alexandra. But I hope you'll at least consider getting to know Elizabeth, not as the queen, but as the woman who has mourned you for 40 years. After Alexandra left, Margaret reported back to Elizabeth, who was anxiously waiting at the palace. She's considering it. Give her time, Elizabeth. This is a lot to process. Do you think she'll come around? Elizabeth asked hopefully. I think she's her mother's daughter, Margaret said with a small smile. Which means she'll do the right thing, even if it takes her a while to figure out what that is. Another week passed before Alexandra made her decision. She wrote to Elizabeth directly this time, suggesting a private meeting. No palaces, no protocol. Just 2 women trying to understand each other. They met at a private estate outside London, one used by the royal family for discreet gatherings. Elizabeth came alone, having insisted that even her protection officers remain at a distance. When Alexandra arrived, she found the Queen of Aldoria waiting nervously in a simple sitting room, looking more like an anxious mother than a monarch. Thank you for coming, Elizabeth said softly. I almost didn't, Alexandra admitted. I wrote a dozen letters telling you to leave me alone. But my mother, Marie, always taught me that running from truth never solved anything. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. Alexandra sat down, maintaining distance between them. I've been thinking about her constantly. About how she must have felt, taking another woman's baby. About the courage it took to raise me alone after her husband died. About the lies she lived with every day. She gave you love, Elizabeth said. That's what matters most. Did you love me? The question came out harsher than Alexandra intended. When I was born, before they took me away, did you love me? Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. From the moment I first felt you move inside me, when you were born, they let me hold you for just a minute. You were so small, so perfect. You had a full head of dark hair and the tiniest fingers. I begged them to let me keep you, but they said it was better this way, that you'd have a good family, a normal life. Then they told me you'd died, and a part of me died too. I've seen the birth records, Alexandra said. You named me. Alexandra, Elizabeth confirmed. After my grandmother. I wanted you to have something from me, even if you'd never know it. The fact that Marie kept the name, it means more than you know. They sat in silence for a moment before Alexandra spoke again. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to have a mother when I'm 40 years old. I don't know how to be your daughter when you have other children who've known you their whole lives. We don't have to figure it all out today, Elizabeth said. We can take it slowly, get to know each other without expectations. You don't have to call me mother. You don't have to be part of the royal family if you don't want to, but I hope you'll give me a chance to know you. Not as the queen, just as Elizabeth. And if the press finds out, if it becomes a scandal, then we'll deal with it, Elizabeth said firmly. I'm tired of living in fear of scandal. You're my daughter. I'm not ashamed of that. If the world has a problem with it, that's their issue, not ours. Alexandra studied the woman across from her, seeing not the crown but the pain of a mother who had lost her child. I can't promise anything. I can't promise I'll ever be comfortable with this or that I'll want to be part of your world, but I'm willing to try. Slowly. That's all I can ask, Elizabeth said, hope blooming in her chest. Would you tell me about your work? About the children you help? For the next 2 hours, they talked. Not about royal protocols or succession or scandal, but about medicine and life and the small things that make up a person. Alexandra found herself relaxing, seeing glimpses of herself in Elizabeth's mannerisms, understanding where her own determination came from. As the afternoon waned, Alexandra stood to leave. I should get back. I have surgery tomorrow morning. Of course, Elizabeth said, rising as well. Alexandra, would it be all right if I wrote to you? Nothing pressing, just letters. Getting to know each other. Alexandra considered this. Yes, I think I'd like that. As she turned to go, Elizabeth called out impulsively, I'm proud of you. I know I have no right to be, but I'm so proud of the woman you've become. Alexandra paused at the door, looking back. Marie used to say the same thing. She offered a small smile. Maybe you both had something to do with it, even if I didn't know it. After she left, Elizabeth sat alone in the quiet room, tears streaming down her face. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief and tentative joy. It wasn't a perfect reunion, wasn't the mother-daughter embrace she had dreamed of, but it was a beginning. Over the following months, letters flew between them. Alexandra wrote about her difficult cases, her triumphs and failures in the operating room. Elizabeth shared stories of her own youth, of the years after Alexandra's birth, of the family she had built while always missing one piece. Gradually, tentatively, they built a relationship. Alexandra began visiting the private estate regularly, away from prying eyes. Sometimes Margaret joined them, adding her own wit and wisdom to their conversations. Eventually, William came too. Quiet and observant at first, but warming to the daughter-in-law he'd never expected to have. The day came when Elizabeth knew they couldn't keep the secret much longer. Too many people were beginning to notice, to ask questions. Palace staff wondered about the mysterious woman who visited so regularly. The press had caught wind of something, though they hadn't yet pieced together what. "We need to tell the others," Elizabeth said during one of their meetings. "Charles, Catherine, Edward, and Anne, they deserve to hear it from us, not read about it in the papers." Alexandra had been dreading this moment. How do you tell someone they have a sister they've never met, that their mother has been lying their entire lives? "The same way I told you," Elizabeth said, "with honesty and hope for understanding." The family dinner was arranged for the following week. All of Elizabeth and William's children were summoned to the palace, told only that there was important family business to discuss. They arrived curious and slightly concerned, gathering in the private dining room where so many family moments had been shared. Charles, the eldest and heir to the throne, noticed the tension immediately. "Mother, father, what's this about? Is someone ill?" "No one's ill," William assured them. "But your mother has something important to tell you all, something that affects our entire family." Elizabeth stood, her hands clasped tightly together. "My darlings, what I'm about to tell you may be difficult to hear. I ask only that you listen with open hearts and remember that actions taken in fear 40 years ago don't diminish the love I have for each of you." She told them the story, watching their faces transform from confusion to shock to something harder to read. Catherine, always the most emotional, had tears in her eyes. Edward looked stunned. Anne seemed to be calculating the implications. Charles, ever the dutiful heir, was unreadable. "You have a sister," Elizabeth concluded. "Her name is Alexandra, and she's a wonderful woman. A doctor who saves children's lives. She only recently learned the truth herself, and we've been getting to know each other these past months." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Charles spoke. Does she want to be part of this family? Does she have claims to the succession?" "She has no interest in the throne," Elizabeth said quickly. "She has a life, a career she loves. But yes, she would like to know you all if you're willing." "Willing?" Catherine stood suddenly. "Mother, she's our sister. Of course we're willing. When can we meet her?" "You're not angry?" Elizabeth asked, surprised. "I'm shocked," Catherine admitted. "I'm hurt that you kept this from us, but angry? How can I be angry that I have another sibling? That you found your lost daughter?" Edward nodded slowly. "Catherine's right. It's a lot. But if she's family, then she's family." Anne, practical as always, raised concerns about the media, the public reaction, the constitutional implications. But even she concluded with, "We'll need to manage this carefully, but I want to meet her." Charles remained silent longer than the others. As the heir, he had the most to consider. Finally, he stood and walked to his mother, embracing her. "You've carried this alone for too long," he said quietly. "We'll face whatever comes together, as a family. All of us." The meeting between Alexandra and her half-siblings was arranged for the following week. She was terrified, more nervous than before any surgery. These were people who had grown up with everything she hadn't: a mother's love, a father's protection, the security of knowing exactly who they were. But when Catherine rushed forward to embrace her, when Edward shook her hand warmly, when Anne offered a sincere welcome, and when Charles said simply, "We're glad you're here," Alexandra felt something shift inside her. This wasn't the family she had grown up with, but perhaps it could become the family she chose. The public announcement, when it came, was carefully orchestrated. A simple statement acknowledging that the Queen had given birth to a daughter before her marriage, that the child had been raised by another family, and that they had recently reconnected. It emphasized Alexandra's desire for privacy and her intention to continue her medical career. The media frenzy was intense but shorter-lived than expected. In an age where royal scandals seemed commonplace, a decades-old secret about a premarital pregnancy seemed almost quaint. There were think pieces about women's rights and the pressures of the 1960s, documentaries about adoption and reunion, but mostly there was a sense of romantic satisfaction. The lost princess had been found. Alexandra weathered the storm by focusing on her work. Her patients didn't care that she was technically a princess. They cared that she could mend their children's hearts. The hospital board, after the initial shock, realized that having a royal surgeon could only enhance their reputation and fundraising efforts. A year after that first meeting in Margaret's sitting room, the family gathered for Elizabeth's 61st birthday. It was a private celebration at the Scottish estate, away from public eyes. Alexandra had debated attending, but ultimately decided to come. As she watched Elizabeth surrounded by all her children, laughing at something William said, dancing with Charles, she felt a sense of completion she hadn't known she was missing. Marie Delacroix would always be her mother in the ways that mattered most. But Elizabeth was her mother too, and this complicated, loving, imperfect family was hers if she wanted it. Margaret appeared at her elbow. "Overwhelming, aren't they?" she said with a knowing smile. "A bit," Alexandra admitted. "I'm still not used to it all." "You will be, or you won't, and that's fine too. The point is you're here. You're part of this now, as much or as little as you choose to be." Later that evening, Elizabeth found Alexandra on the terrace, looking out over the Highland landscape. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "I know it wasn't easy." "No," Alexandra agreed, "but the right things rarely are." She turned to face her biological mother. "I've been thinking about Marie a lot lately, about what she would say about all this." "What do you think she would say?" Alexandra smiled. "I think she would say that love multiplies. It doesn't divide. That having you in my life doesn't diminish what she and I had. She gave me roots. Maybe you can give me wings." Elizabeth felt tears prick her eyes. "I hope so. Oh, my darling girl, I hope so." As the evening drew on, the family slowly migrated inside, drawn by the warmth of the fire and each other's company. Alexandra found herself seated between Charles and Catherine, included in the family jokes, the shared memories being made in real time. William caught her eye across the room and raised his glass slightly, a silent welcome. She nodded back, understanding passing between them. He had accepted her not because it was easy, but because it was right. Because families were built on more than blood. They were built on choice, on forgiveness, on the decision to love even when it was complicated. The clock struck midnight, marking the end of Elizabeth's birthday and the beginning of a new day. As the family began to drift off to bed, Elizabeth took Alexandra's hand. "Stay," she said simply. "Not forever, just tonight. There's a room prepared for you. Be part of the morning chaos, the breakfast arguments, the normal family things we never got to share." Alexandra hesitated, then nodded. "All right, just tonight." But as she settled into the guest room, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her, doors closing, quiet goodnights, the ancient building creaking in the wind, she knew it wouldn't be just tonight. It would be many nights, scattered throughout the years to come. Not a replacement for the life she had built, but an addition to it. In her room, Elizabeth knelt by her window as she had so many times over the years, but tonight her prayers were of gratitude rather than longing. Her daughter had been returned to her, not as the baby she had lost, but as the remarkable woman she had become. It wasn't the story she had imagined, but it was theirs, and it was real. The sun rose over the Scottish Highlands, painting the landscape in shades of gold and promise. In the kitchen, the family gathered as they always did, but with one more place set at the table. Alexandra entered uncertainly, still in borrowed pajamas, her usual professional composure replaced by something softer. "Coffee?" Catherine offered, already knowing her sister's preference from their growing correspondence. "Please," Alexandra said, accepting the cup gratefully. "Fair warning," Edward said with a grin. "Charles makes terrible scrambled eggs but insists on cooking them anyway." "Slander," Charles protested, waving a spatula. "My eggs are perfectly adequate." "Adequately awful," Anne corrected, and the kitchen erupted in laughter. Alexandra watched the familiar chaos of sibling interaction, feeling both apart from and part of it. Elizabeth noticed her observation and moved to stand beside her. "They're a lot," she said quietly, "but they're yours if you want them." "I'm beginning to think I do," Alexandra replied, surprising herself with the admission. As the morning progressed, full of teasing and talk and the ordinary magic of family, Alexandra felt the last of her walls beginning to crumble. This wasn't the family she had grown up with, wasn't the life she had expected. But perhaps that was the point. Life rarely gave you what you expected. Sometimes it gave you what you needed instead. The story of the lost princess would fade from the headlines, replaced by newer scandals and fresher gossip. But for the family gathered in that Highland kitchen, the story was just beginning. A story not of secrets and loss, but of found things and second chances. A story of a daughter who found her way home, not to a palace or a throne, but to a mother's love that had never wavered, even across 40 years of silence. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.